Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you. So a very good evening to everyone here today, and a very warm welcome both to those here in person and also to our online audience. And welcome to the Royal Society of Medicine for our third flagship Engineering Needs Everyone event. It's wonderful to see the room so full and filled with so many people who care about the future of engineering and the society it serves. So I'm Holley Reece-Barkell. I chair the Cultural Inclusion Committee with the IMechE. And I've just got new glasses. So I've got contact lenses and I've got reading glasses now as well. So you might just have to bear with me. So we've just got a few housekeeping things to start with as well. And just to introduce myself as well, for those who are unable to see me, I've got blonde hair, I'm about 5'10", I'm wearing a very bright pink top and some black trousers. So if I could please ask you to silence your phones. For those who, so in case of emergency, please follow the direction of the staff. We proceed to the assembly point on the footpath on Wimpole Street, which is opposite the main entrance. And unfortunately, due to a technical issue, we are unable to use the live captions in the room. However, if you go to the QR code, it will take you to a Zoom link, and then you'll be able to follow the captions online. So when the Engineering Needs Everyone event first began in 2024, it was intended as a one-off celebration marking 100 years since the Verena Holmes, first woman to be elected to the membership of the IMechE. It was a milestone worth celebrating, absolutely, but the conversation it sparked grew into something bigger and something a lot deeper. It became a platform for examining the question that affects each and every one of us. Who is engineering for? And how can we shape a more inclusive profession and society? And how can we do that together? Tonight's theme is En route to inclusive transport, and this builds on the institution's recent policy report, which highlights the barriers that many people face when navigating public transport in the UK. And I'll be honest, when I first began exploring the topic, I just had no idea how big the challenge really is. So let me share just a few facts. In the UK, around 16.8 million people identify as having a disability. And disabilities are not always physical or visible. They may be mental health conditions, for example, chronic pain or fatigue, or internal conditions like IBS. So statistics from the National Centre for Accessibility for Transport shows that over 90% of disabled people face barriers when they're travelling. 79% of disabled people travel less often. 84% of disabled people face longer journey times, and many encounter barriers at almost every stage: cluttered pavements, a lack of step-free access, poor staff assistance, and unreliable information. So these barriers don't just make journeys harder, they limit access to work, education, healthcare, and leisure. And when people are excluded from opportunity, we all lose out. So accessible transport isn't just a moral obligation, it's an economic one too. A staggering £72 billion could be gained by closing the transport accessibility gap, according to the Motability Foundation. But accessibility isn't just a disability issue, it's a society issue. It affects the older generations, it affects women travelling at night, it affects families with young children, it affects people with temporary injuries, chronic conditions, heavy luggage and shopping bags, or simply low confidence. So consider some of these realities. 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent, and many rely on predictable, calm, and not overly crowded services. 1 in 5 people are deaf, or they are hard of hearing, and they need clear, accessible information to be able to travel safely. And here's where one of my biggest learnings came in. We must take a systems approach. So inclusive transport isn't just trains and buses, it's everything from the moment that people leave their home until they reach their destination. It's the pavement, it's the bus shelter, it's those ticket machines, it's the platform, it's the train, and it's all the information provided along the way. And it's every decision that engineers, planners, and policymakers make in between. There is little value in designing a beautiful train if the person who needs it most can't get down the stairs to the platform. The IMechE policy report sets an aspiration for a truly inclusive public transport network, one that enables everyone to participate fully in society. Engineers play an essential role in this, not just designing trains or infrastructure, but in shaping the whole journey. The report implores government and the transport sector to ensure outcomes are enabled by data, existing systems are fit for purpose, and that upskilling partnership is prioritised to grow that design expertise. So tonight, we are fortunate enough to be joined by some fantastic keynote speakers and a panel who have lived experience, technical expertise, and incredible passion for positive change. I want to thank them all for being here and for pushing this conversation forward. I also want to extend a huge thank you to our exhibitors, whose work you will be able to have the opportunity to explore during the networking portion of this evening. Their innovations show what's possible and what we can do when we put people at the centre. Now, we know the challenges are significant, but engineers thrive on big challenges. And across the country, we're already seeing local authorities and operators and manufacturers stepping up with creative, practical solutions. So the Liverpool City Region, Combined Authority and Merseyrail, for example, consulted extensively with passengers, including disabled passengers, in both procuring their new fleets of trains. The results? An automatic sliding step that meets the platform edge and also wider aisles on the trains without sacrificing seating capacity. We're also taking innovation in unexpected places. Ticket machines with height adjustable screens, dedicated dog spending areas, commonplace in airports, are now there are trials in Scotland exploring the concept of robo-guide dogs for public spaces. So these ideas, big and small, all reflect a powerful truth that inclusive transport is not just an engineering problem, it's an engineering opportunity. It's an opportunity to rethink, redesign, and reimagine. An opportunity to collaborate across civil, mechanical, electrical, software, engineering disciplines. And it's an opportunity to align accessibility with net zero, with economic resilience, and with ethical responsibility. But most importantly, it's an opportunity to ensure that public transport truly serves the public, all of the public. And that's why we're here tonight, to learn, to listen, to understand the lived experiences that sit behind the data. And to leave with a renewed commitment to show that engineering genuinely includes everybody. So thank you again for joining us. I hope the evening sparks some new ideas, some new collaborations, and some new determination to create a transport system and a society that works for us all. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our truly remarkable individual as our first keynote speaker, Baroness Grey-Thompson. So widely celebrated as one of Britain's greatest Paralympians, she has 16 Paralympic medalists, including an extraordinary 11 gold medals, and has also broken more than 30 world records throughout her career. So beyond her sporting achievements, Baroness Grey-Thompson has become a powerful advocate for disability rights, public services, and social change, bringing her insights and energy to the House of Lords as a crossbench peer. And I have two fun facts, which I haven't fact-checked, so hopefully they're going to be okay. So the first is that the Baroness, or Tanny, does not usually display her Olympic medals, but when she visits schools, she sometimes carries the medals in her backpack so she can show them to the school children if she would like. And secondly, despite being one of the fastest women on wheels, she still gets competitive about everyday things, like trying to race her family to the security gates at airports. So thank you very much. I'd like to welcome Baroness Grey-Thompson to the stage.
Thank you very much for that. Actually, I keep my medals in a rucksack behind my washing machine. So anyway, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. Brief description, I'm a woman, I'm a wheelchair user. My hair changes colour frequently. I'm sort of blondish at the moment. I've got glasses on and I mostly wear black. So it's really lovely to be here tonight. I kind of look around the audience and see some familiar faces, but I also see lots of people I don't know, which is really important in terms of what we're trying to do. And, you know, the research is really important because you need data. Data matters. But it's actually what we do with it. And I take a lot of train journeys a year. Not so much buses and taxis. I do drive. But it probably feels like I'm going to have a little bit of a moan to you tonight. But I'm also going to set you a challenge of, in the areas that you work, how many disabled people do you work with? When you were doing various exams and going through university and other things, how many disabled people were on your courses? And where is the voice of disabled people? A lot of places it's a panel at the end of the decision-making process. It's not at the heart of decision-making, and that's where I think we have some of the problems that we're dealing with today. So in the early 90s, the Disability Discrimination Act, and I sat on the National Disability Council, which was the board that oversaw the implementation of it. The DDA said that all trains would be step-free by January the 1st, 2020. And when in the 90s, I kind of remember thinking, I don't think I'll ever be that old. You know, that I kind of didn't believe I would have to wait that long for trains to be accessible, let alone anything else. Because of derogations, basically, lots of people to blame, kicking the can down the road. It's now going to be 100 years. Because the challenge is it's not one thing that has gone wrong. It's lots of things that have joined together to make that happen. And when, mentioning earlier about, joining up the system, we've got rail replacement buses that are not wheelchair accessible, a lack of wheelchair spaces, a lot of trains that I travel on. My husband is a part-time wheelchair user. We can't actually travel together, probably don't often want to, but that's beside the point. When my daughter was a baby in a pram, that caused complete carnage. One train company suggested that I put my 6-week-old baby in a different carriage because we couldn't be in the same space. Ticket machines are still being designed to be largely inaccessible. At one of the stations I went to recently, there was a lovely wheelchair symbol to bring it all down to my level. I've got a 5'10" wingspan. I couldn't reach the little wheelchair symbol to bring it down. So actually things like buying tickets are really difficult. And the reason, we could all do better, I live in the northeast of England, I work in London and Cardiff. I take anything up to 300 long train journeys a year. I spend between £10,000 and £15,000 a year on train tickets. So it's not just about me, but it's about actually how we can make it better for everyone. And I'm treated better than any other disabled person I know on public transport because people recognise me. At Euston, I'm known as the person who tweets. They go, ooh, it's her, which is fine, but that still doesn't stop lots of things going wrong. I was on a train journey last year and it was all going wrong and there were lots of delays, the trains were packed. They realised I was on board because I was tweeting. A member of the staff came up to me and basically said, don't worry, we're getting you off early, we'll get you off at York, there is a taxi waiting, it will take you to your home, which is not meant to do, it's meant to take you to the nearest train station. And they basically said, do you promise not to tweet? No, actually, I'm going to tweet about that because, it's good, but you are treating me differently. And when I have quite robust discussions with various train companies, they usually say to me, what do you want? What do you want? And they expect me to quote regulations and legislation. It's like, no, I want the same miserable experience of commuting as everyone else. I don't have that. and I get treated better than anyone else I know. So my own station, I live in a tiny little place in the north of England called Eaglescliffe, between Darlington and Middlesbrough. We moved there deliberately to be near a train station because my life was going to be based in London. Actually at considerable expense to move to a different part of the country. I have never campaigned for my local station to be accessible, but somehow it got through lots of different processes and ended up on the list of the stations that would get lifts. Everyone thought I'd be celebrating. There's a very steep, two steep ramps. At any one point, 2% of Network Rail's lifts are out of order. So I said, so what happens? So instead of 10 minutes before the train leaves on a Monday morning for me to go to London, what do I do? At the moment, I just pop along to the train station. If the train's late, they know me at the train station, they let me go home and ring me when the train's on the way. Amazing, they do that for everyone, not just for me. So by taking the ramps out, it would change my life that every single week I'd have to go to the station an hour earlier to check whether the lifts were working, to then go home or to make alternative arrangements. And in the end, after lots of robust discussions, they're leaving the ramps in. Mostly, and I did a podcast earlier, mostly because I said to them, you'll all go off and work in something else in the next couple of years. You all think you've done a brilliant job. But when the lift breaks and I'm having to kind of figure out what to do at 6:30 on a Monday morning so I can get to my job, I will find you. See, I said it's very Liam Neeson, isn't it? I will find you and I will email you. Don't think when you go to work on another project, you're away from me. And this is why it's so important to kind of think beyond. So my dad was an architect. My best mate's a civil engineer. They were hysterical when they got together. My dad would be like, every engineer is stupid and can't read a simple diagram. Nikki would be like, every architect is like, design things that aren't possible to build and have no concept of money. So they did have this little game they played with each other. But for me, it's thinking about how we can design differently, because all the mistakes that have been made since the DDA are baked in. And the decision and so in my lifetime, I will not be able to get on or off a train without the permission of a non-disabled person. So, I said right at the beginning, data is important. Yes, it is. But it doesn't join up. We've got Network Rail, which has got a map of the train stations in the UK with tons of mistakes on it. 3 of us picked 5 stations each, and all 5 stations that we knew really well that had incorrect information. Booking assistance doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to get on or off a train. And the impact that it has on my life, I'm meant to be at a train station 30 minutes before the train leaves, even when I've booked assistance. And when I don't book assistance, they like you to be there longer. This week I'm taking 7 trains. 3 hours of my life will be spent just sitting at a train station, hoping that someone will get me on. And today, I had an amazing experience this morning. Going to a new station, never travelled to before, got there really early, actually 35 minutes before my train. They put me on an earlier train. I got to my destination earlier. Yay. I knew I shouldn't have been excited. Coming to London, I'd booked assistance, went to the ticket office. Person at the ticket office said, not a problem, I'll come up and get you on at the time your train is due to leave. Train came in, he's not there. Sit and wait, go and find somebody. Onboard guard is trying to find. The man comes to the platform and almost joyously says, I can't get you on, I've got an exemption. So what was he trying to do? He didn't go and find someone else. He didn't say you need to speak to someone else. He said, I will come and get you on the train. So I'm not going to say which company it is or where it's from, but because actually I'm starting to go legal on this, because actually a lot of the time things will only change when disabled people take a legal approach. And it shouldn't happen like that. It should actually just be better. So we've got derogations, kicking the can down the road. We've got bridges that are currently being designed that cross railway lines that are inaccessible. Judicial reviews cost a lot of money. There's one currently a bridge that's been approved in Kent that is probably going to go to judicial review. There was one that went last year and there's more. And I just don't think it's good enough that we have to make it so difficult, not just for disabled people, but for the whole population. But there are some bright sparks. You know, Liverpool, Transport for Wales have bought low-floor trains. You know, there's some really cool things. And I'm going to mention one train company very briefly, because they nearly got it right. Greater Anglia bought low-floor trains. They kind of got a bit confused, and then they took out the ramps for all the train stations on their line. So actually, where you still needed a ramp, you couldn't get on and had to buy new ramps. There are 56 different ramps on the rail network, and so that, you know, causes a problem. But it felt like a step forward until a group of us started asking about the design of the train and about where the wheelchair space was, and it's in the same carriage as the cafe bar. Got really excited. Actually, I could get on a train and I could go to the cafe bar. So I thought. We asked about it, and they said, well, maybe you could get your carer to go, because actually you won't get your wheelchair through. Okay. And then the response was on social media, don't worry, you'll be in sight of the cafe bar. Brilliant. It's what I've spent my whole life campaigning for. I can see it, but I can't buy anything from it. It then all got a bit silly on social media with various people saying, I'll get my guide dog to go and get you an egg and cress sandwich, but might eat it. But it's things like this. And I kind of use humour because for me, it's the only way, but because otherwise it would just be deeply frustrating. But these things are mistakes that shouldn't happen. It's a step forward, but actually I think we can all just do a huge amount better. So we need to be creative at what we do with a very old network. You would not build it this way if you started from scratch. There's no point, you know, spending money changing platform heights unless you buy low floor trains, and it's a bit of a catch-22. But it's making sure it's possible to do it for everyone, and just thinking differently. And, you know, the fact you've come along and you're interested tonight is a really good step. But think about what you can do to make a real difference, to make sure that I have the same miserable commute as everyone else. We've got a railways bill coming to the House of Lords soon. That is not going to fix everything. It might be a start, but it's got to be more than legislation. It's got to be what's happening day in, day out in the decision-making processes, in the offices, when you're planning ahead. That is where we can really make a difference. And if people think about the individual difference they can make, we actually do have a chance of making the system slightly more accessible than it currently is. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. And I think some of my key takeaways were how you brought to life those extended journey times that are just kind of standard for you, and how you've had to resort to persistence and legal challenges just to enact change. And I think that final message about how we can all make that individual difference going forwards. So thank you very much. So I'd like to introduce our next keynote speaker. And this is Tom Morgan, who's the founder and CEO of Supersmith. So Tom is the co-founder and CEO, a bold startup on a mission to reinvent how the world thinks about mobility scooters. The debut product, the 3 scooter, is set to launch in spring 2026 and promises to transform not just the ride, but the entire experience of living with a mobility scooter. Tom brings a rich blend of engineering, transportation, consulting and marketing expertise, so is perfectly positioned to drive the new wave of innovation. And they also have a stand outside, so when we get to the networking portion of this evening, I'd thoroughly encourage you to go and have a look at one of the scooters that Tom's got out there. So I'd like to welcome Tom to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Tanny. That was an exceptionally powerful, direct and clear call to action, I think, for all of us. So brief description, I am a white male, short, got a brown hair. I too have new glasses, which means I am pushing them on my nose continuously throughout the next 10 minutes. So I'm going to talk to you about what we are up to. Let me just check. Here we go. So this is my sister, and when with her family, she's the one in the middle. My sister was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in her early 30s. And she's used mobility scooters for the last 15 to 20 years to kind of really enable her to maintain a very active social life and a very active life in general. I don't know if you have direct experience of mobility scooters, but as Jill here explains, they're pretty important to very many people. In fact, fundamental to how you might experience work, life, everything. And you may think that this is perhaps the sorts of images, the sorts of products that you have in mind. They're certainly what I think of as the traditional mobility scooter. Whether you have direct experience or not, you might be aware that they provide, in my view, an exceptionally poor experience. Most importantly, they are unsafe. So the Dutch Transport Agency has identified that they have 5 times the number of fatalities per kilometre travelled than motorbikes, right? Primarily because they tip. They're unsociable. Right? The solution to the tipping issue is to sit people low, and the consequence of that is just a less socially empowering and confident position. And also, they're not very well loved. They typically are undesirable, and people like my sister, in fact, half of people with MS are reported to say that they are too embarrassed to use one because they don't want to be identified with what they consider to be mobility scooter users in general. And so people are not leaving their homes, and they are feeling, if they do, they're feeling less good about themselves, which changes everything about that experience. And so about 7 years ago, we started, myself and my 2 co-founders, we started looking at the root cause issue, which for us was the stability, the fact that people tip. And as a consequence, our patented robotic technology, come and see us, we're outside. When you go over uneven ground, the rear wheels, the rear legs adjust, so you kind of glide across that surface. If you corner too sharply, then it gently leans you in to again maintain stability. The benefit of this is that we can safely sit people a little bit higher, up to 90% of their standing height, should they choose it, to change the dynamic, and for my sister, not give her a sore neck throughout the day. Video is far better than me at explaining it. I will do a voiceover to the kind of process. So here's the tipping problem that I described. A 4-wheel vehicle going around a corner and maybe over on some uneven ground. The consequences can be pretty terrible. Okay, and the consequence of that is a low sitting position to help people have a safer journey. So this is us, Fred, my CTO, and myself, kind of trying to get the technology going in our front rooms. We progressed to lab development. Here's a glass of water on the vehicle, and then into the kind of real world. So it uses sensors like a drone to understand its situation. And finally, we cracked the curb situation, so you can safely navigate what is a very, very common piece of infrastructure on every single pavement. I don't know what they are, goodness. All right, co-production, making sure that it isn't just a bit of technology, it is a product that can genuinely bring benefit to people. The way we've done that is with a fantastic community of people throughout the process to ensure that they make the decisions and guide the priorities, not us. But it's more than technology, it's more than the practicalities. Why shouldn't a product that is to enable people to move, beautiful, extremely well designed, and something that looks like it's had a lot of love put into it? And so we've put a lot of effort into that as well, and been supported with a kind of a wide community of talented designers to ensure that it looks and feels like any other consumer product that you might want to buy. Here is the 3 scooter. We are coming to market in about 8 weeks' time, fingers crossed. And we're starting off in our base, which is in Bristol, and we've got a great following and kind of 800 or so people on our wait list to kind of provide that first boost. But one of the questions posed by this event was kind of further benefits can the three-scooter and the technology bring to transport networks? And we believe this one. So this is this is an example of shared micromobility, growing rapidly across the UK in many, many cities as part of the pilot programme, but also globally. None of the vehicles, and this is a recognised issue, are actually accessible. Okay, it's great if you can balance on a bike or an e-scooter, but many people can't, whether you have a disability or not. And so we've been exploring how that environment could help. The Motability Foundation released a report last year that showed 1.9 million disabled people would benefit with shared micromobility if we could address this problem. And so, with the National Centre for Accessible Transport last year and a number of very, very kind of capable partners, we spent about 6 to 8 months looking at how the vehicle that we have could apply in a shared context. And that was supported by a lot of test rides and a lot of interviews and co-production of the operational context that would need to work in. And the result, what I'm delighted to say, was the results were clear that people felt safe. They felt the vehicle would enable them to get access to this form of transport. It was desirable and, in fact, enjoyable, which was something that we didn't fully expect. And 100% of the people that kind of took part of that survey, part of that process, said they would use a shared micromobility scheme that had the three-scooter as part of the fleet. All right, that's one solution. There's more that needs to be done to enable the entire start to end of that process to be accessible, but that's something that we're more than capable collectively of solving. And so I'm going to finish up there, but hopefully we've given you a small insight into one solution to the kind of challenge that's been posed here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And please don't run away because we need you for the panel session coming up next. So I'm an engineer. I probably should have mentioned at the start, I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. So I really loved that presentation because you brought out a bit of the geek in me in terms of kind of seeing how that works. So next we're going to move on to the panel session. So if I could invite our panel to join me on the stage, that would be fantastic. I also think I just inadvertently called all engineers geeks, which wasn't my intention. I'm proud of being a geek. Thank you all for joining us. So we've got about 45 minutes or so. The intention is to go through a few questions and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end for some Q&A. So please get your thinking caps on if you've got any questions that you'd like to raise, either online or in the audience here. So we'll kick off with our first question. And if I could ask each of you, if you haven't done so already, to briefly introduce yourself and then share with us why the topic of accessibility and inclusive transport is personally important to you and what motivates you to work in this space. So perhaps, Tom, I can start with you and then we'll go along the panel.
So I guess mine might be kind of immediately quite obvious because of the story I've just told about my sister. We sometimes talk about Wenna, but often we talk about Ellie. And Ellie is a mum who wants to take her daughter, that we got to know, she wants to take her daughter to the playground. Ellie can't do that because it's too far for her to walk. And she would benefit from a mobility scooter, she tells us. But her husband, it's not entirely his fault, but there's a general sense that she doesn't fit the profile of someone that would use a mobility scooter in his mind. And so she doesn't get one, and therefore she doesn't take her daughter to the park. And so we think a lot about how we're going to help get Ellie to the park. And I tell that story not because there's lots of Ellies, is my point, I guess. And I think that probably within a person or two of yourselves, there is an Ellie or someone with a story that you could feel passionate about, or you do feel passionate about, and I think that was my starting point, someone close to home. And then you suddenly start to uncover the issues and the size of the problem that we've heard about this evening. And so, yeah, what's your story, I guess?
Thank you, Tom.
Good evening. I'm Emma Partlow, Chief Executive Officer of NCAT, National Centre for Accessible Transport. I'm a white woman with dark brown hair, wearing a black and white monochrome dress with a black blazer. And at my feet is Luna. She's a yellow Labrador in a red and yellow assistance dog jacket. Why is this important to me? We think about accessible and inclusive transport, and it's personally important to me. I'm a proudly disabled person. That doesn't tell you much about me. What does that mean? Under the Equality Act 2010, that means I live with a long-term impairment that lasts 12 months or more. Beyond that, I'm a human being, I'm a colleague, I'm a mum, I'm a wife, I'm a friend. When I think about transport, I think it's really easy to fall into this trap. We think about vehicles, we think about physical modes of moving around. Transport is the glue. It means I can get to work. It means I can take my daughter to the museum. It means I can visit friends and be a part of society. And I'm personally really committed to making sure that the system is far more accessible moving forward than it is, because transport is the glue that keeps people moving and a part of society, not just moving, but an integral key part of society. Without transport, disabled people are not there. They're not moving. They're not present within society and within the systems around us. And that's why I'm personally committed to this.
And I love that analogy of glue as well, right from when you leave your home to your final destination. It's gluing all of those system components together. I love that. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Teichler. I am Inclusive Design Specialist in TfL's Customer Diversity and Inclusion team. I don't have necessarily a personal story. I've been working in the accessibility and inclusion field for about 20 years, including 13 at TfL. And when I started, I knew nothing about accessibility and inclusion. And I guess just what I saw was just how unjust it is that disabled people and other people excluded from the opportunities that Emma was talking about, how unjust it is that that's because we put those barriers in place. And yeah, being part of an organisation that transports so many people around London is absolutely, it's absolutely fundamental to accessing those opportunities that make life meaningful, give people the opportunity to live life to the full, and to use, make the most of their potential. So it's just something I feel really passionately about. I also think it's really unjust that in a lot of cases when we talk about accessible transport, we are talking about the ability to use rather than something that's truly inclusive. Lots of accessible transport is, routes can be more difficult to find, to use. They require, they're more difficult, they are more restrictive, they separate people from the people that they're travelling from and from the general travelling public. They do not offer an equitable experience. And I just think that's fundamentally unjust. And I think it's also important that we remember that by making those systems not fully inclusive, not just accessible but inclusive, we add an additional physical, cognitive and emotional load onto people, so that when they actually get to where they're going to do the thing that they've travelled for, they have less energy left to be able to do that.
Great. Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, that you use up all that almost mental energy before you even got to the activity that you're going to undertake.
Yeah. And apologies, I forgot to say that I am a 5'4" woman with tie-back hair, glasses, wearing all black.
Thank you. Tanny, please.
Well, thank you. So for me, it's beyond just what I'm able to do, because I said, actually, I kind of can make the system work for me, because it should just work for everyone. But it's just exhausting how much extra time, effort, energy you've got to be, booking, worrying about whether you're going to get on or off. I often travel at the weekends, you're always trying to second guess anything. And because I've just always done it, I'm not entirely sure how much energy it takes, but it is just quite a lot. and actually how much better use that could be put to, but also the number of people who just don't feel that they can use the system. I think when you said it's unjust, I think that's, you know, a really good example. And where I've seen sort of stuff is good, it's because so much is about people, where people go above and beyond and think differently about what they do. So I had an example years ago. I've had two at TfL where I was trying to get Westminster to King's Cross, and before I'd even gone through the gate line, a member of staff stopped me. I can't repeat the word he used. He basically went, "It's not happening for you to get there." It's like, okay. But he came and hailed a taxi from me on Bridge Street. So he kind of helped be part of the solution. And those sort of things, I think, are really good as well. A lot of the time, it feels like it's computer says no, you know, and, you know, I've booked, you know, train journeys where it's come back as, you know, accepted as booking, and then you find out the station's not accessible and things like that, you know, and that's the bit. It's like, you know, I'm always all right, but I just think there's probably thousands of people who just aren't.
Thank you. So I'm going to move us on to our next question, which is around the language that we use. And I guess this question's somewhat personal to me as well, because as I said, I chair the Culture and Inclusion Committee within the IMechE, and I think sometimes it can be difficult to kind of keep up with what the most relevant language to use is and what the most relevant terms to use are. And sometimes I find myself perhaps shying away from a conversation because I don't want to inadvertently upset somebody or insult somebody by using the wrong language. So I think part of this for me is recognising that people generally do have best intentions and being able to help correct people if they are using perhaps terms that are not the best. But I realise that I've just gone and answered the question myself, which wasn't the point of the panel. I'll come to, perhaps Emma, if I come to you first. So how can engineers, designers and all of us build the confidence to engage in conversations around accessibility?
Absolutely. I think you raise a really important point, fear. And I hear this a lot, and it's conversations that we have multiple times at NCAT and beyond. People talk about language changing. When we think about the social model, if you look back at disability theory, it actually hasn't changed since the 1970s. The social model language is disabled people, disabled person. The reason it is that way is because we focus on the fact that society is disabling to the person. Within that, though, we need to respect and recognise that people have individual choice. Lots of people prefer to use person-first language. They will say, I'm a person with a disability, which works for them. Social model really shifts that focus away from the person. And I think when we think about language, it's really easy to get caught up in these debates and spend a lot of time and energy. Language is fundamentally important. It's political, big P and small p. It is crucial. But for me, and I feel this personally and professionally, it's more around the intent and the principles behind that language use. Social model thinking shifts the onus away from the person. People are not disabled because of their bodies. They have impairments, they're living with impairments. They are disabled because of the barriers, many of which we've spoken about here today. That shift in thinking is really profound and powerful, because if you shift the onus away from the person and their bodies, that changes the whole game, that changes the system. You're then not asking people to fix their bodies or for them to overcome the barrier. It pushes the onus onto engineers, designers, society around us to dismantle those barriers. So I think language is really important, and I would always advocate for social model language, with the caveat that people are free to use that language to describe and identify in a way that feels important to them. But it's less about the words. It's more around the intent and the principles behind language use, and shifting that focus onto barriers, not people, really moving away from people's bodies as being the problem, which is more medical model thinking. Because I think you're right, you summed it up really well in the beginning. The real risk of having these conversations is that people become fearful. And I would say it's far more hazardous and risky that people don't talk about disability and accessibility because they're scared of getting it wrong, than have the conversations and stumble through the language, have those awkward and uncomfortable moments, because that's when change happens. The worst thing we can do as a society is to not talk about accessibility because we're fearful of getting the language wrong. People that have worked with me before, you'll know that whenever I'm hosting events, workshops, I always add that caveat at the beginning. I don't believe for a minute that anybody ever acts with malice when they're speaking. Maybe they slip up, maybe they're not using language that feels appropriate to you as an individual. I don't think people mean harm. People are all on their own journeys with language, but it's that intent behind it. And the worst thing we can do is close down conversations. We need to keep having them, and stumble through with whatever language you have within your mindset, and stumble through those with people that can guide you and help shape those conversations.
Fantastic. And Tanny, I saw you nodding there. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, the intent I think is really important. You know, if someone who's 90 calls me, somebody who's recently called me the little handicapped girl. And you go, on what level? Okay, you know, I'm in my 50s, do I take, you know, it's all quite, it wasn't meant maliciously. You know, I think if somebody's younger, you'd hope they'd be able to kind of navigate their way through it. But I think actually ableism is not particularly well understood in the UK, and there's a lot of casual ableism. So the one thing that really sets me off is when I'm told people like you, people like you, you know, people like you can't travel on the tube at 7:30 in the morning because it's rush hour. I did have that a little while ago, and it's like, oh, I'm going to work. Oh, you've got a job? Yes, I do. Yes. Oh, where do you work? Westminster. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, well. It was kind of, I was pushing it slightly to see how far I could get away. And this chap was like, oh, do you answer the phones? Well, yeah, I also answer the phones, you know. So it's that lack of understanding. And we do see more people in society than we have previously. But, you know, transport's part of the blocker. So I think it's just understanding. I think generally it's not a terribly well understood protected characteristic. And the fact that, you know, the symbol for disability is a wheelchair logo, I don't think that helps either, because I think people tend to think about visible impairments. They don't. And, you know, probably we've all got different stories. You know, I've been pushed across the road that I didn't want to go across because somebody decided they were going to push me. A friend who's visually impaired who's been taken across the road. You know, there's all, and in a moment you can sort of laugh about it, but some of that stuff is problematic because it's underlying, because then it comes back to the stuff I was talking about, is where's the voice of disabled people? You know, one thing that I'm really keen that we do, you know, there's a lot of disabled people who are experts, but actually they're never paid for their work. So the number of things that I sit on or have sat on, and I'm the only person who's not paid to be there to give my expertise, and disabled people face this all the time. And because it means their view is not necessarily valued. And if it's not valued, then it can be disposable. And I think that's something that we have to work hard to change, because there's a lot of people who don't just have the lived experience, but have, you know, the detailed knowledge to bring about change, who, you know, it's quite hard for them to be around the table.
Yeah, and losing that lack of control in situations like that when someone pushes you across the road as well. That's, I mean, terrifying in one example.
Well, I mean, I let her do it in the end because I was all being very British, and I wasn't menopausal. So at that point, where I was like, oh, well, just let it all, you know. I mean, it's now. I mean, I probably wouldn't do it now, but yeah, it's hard because as a disabled person, you're constantly having to navigate not offending people, not being rude, trying to educate them, trying to help them understand, not wanting to get into a fight, not wanting to be considered, you know, got a chip on your shoulder. So that's the other lot of energy that disabled people expend all the time, is navigating a non-disabled person's view of being a disabled person.
Absolutely. If I can come back on that as well, absolutely my experience. I've got Luna at my feet. People see a working Labrador. Oh, you're blind, you're visually impaired. I'm not. Luna is task trained and monitors my heart. Often when I'm travelling using various modes of transport, one of the biggest barriers I face is people try and give me sighted guidance, which is actually really dangerous. I don't need it. And, you know, I'm a woman, often travelling late at night, early in the morning. I've often got men grabbing me to give me sighted guidance. We think about intersectionality. That's quite terrifying. And again, the education. Oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't realise you weren't blind. What does she do? It's 6:30 in the morning. I haven't got the time, energy. I'm one coffee in. I don't want to give you a whole history of working dogs. But actually then I become the barrier, rude, and needing to negotiate and navigate these situations before you've even entered the workplace. Really exhausting. So really resonate with a lot of what you've said.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So our next question. If we look at how the transport system and infrastructure are designed today, What changes in the design process could have the biggest impact on removing barriers and enabling that more inclusive journey? So Sarah, perhaps I can come to you first and then to Tom.
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest thing that can happen to the design process is that we build inclusive design into it right from the outset. So not just when we get to the design bit, but actually when we're setting objectives and developing briefs, and then continue that thread all the way through beyond delivery, looking at evaluation, lessons learned, and then feeding that back into the process. And that's absolutely got to be the core thing. And I think there are sort of two ways that we can do that really effectively. One is through meaningful engagement with disabled people and other people with lived experience. And that's got to be, again, all the way through every single stage, not just asking people their opinions at a particular point. It's about co-design, co-production, co-creation, whatever level you want to look at. It's all about working in partnership with people with lived experience. And I think it's sort of worth saying that, disabled people and other people who are excluded by design have to overcome lots of barriers and are quite often really creative and innovative. So, don't wait until you have a solution to go out and ask people for their feedback. Work together, because you will find new ideas that you didn't even know existed. Some of the things that you might need to think about if you're co-designing, co-creating, co-producing is thinking about getting the right people in the room. This sort of goes back to what you were saying, Tani, about people with lived experience and people with expertise. You need to have people who understand how that process works and are able to sort of fully participate in it, and making sure also that process is accessible and inclusive, and that the people involved in it are properly supported to participate as fully as possible. And remuneration is also crucial, as Tani said. People get paid for their skills and expertise, and we shouldn't expect disabled people and other people with lived experience to just give that away for free. That's the only just way of doing it. I think it's also important that learn overnight, and it's really important that we embed inclusive design specialists in design teams to be part of that process as well. Nobody's expecting every engineer or every designer to become a specialist. It's about being able to get those right people in. I would say the two complement each other really closely. So the lived experience, the technical experience, it all works together. And I would also say that quite often we think about, let's design inclusively, let's do a really good job of it when we're thinking about projects where we're designing something to remove access and inclusion barriers, but it should just be the norm for everything we do. Everything we design has the potential to remove barriers, but also create new ones. So we need to make sure every single project has that right expertise built in from the start.
Can I just say one thing TfL I think did brilliantly, and this was sort of 2009-10, was just have one budget for projects. So rather than having the budget and then having an accessibility pot, when Peter Hendy was commissioner, he just brought it all in. So that drove a lot of change. So suddenly things like, Green Park and King's Cross, which are now step free, they just were able to do it in a different way. And that's, a combination of people saying, okay, how can we get the most value for money? And it's completely accelerated. Actually, there's bits of the tube that will never be accessible because it's complicated and hard, but it's accelerated the stations that have been able to be made accessible. It's really good.
Good, yeah.
Tom, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think I'm going to just build on what Sarah's been saying. I think it's a really interesting idea to think about who is the designer. Because I guess traditionally it goes to the person with the title, maybe designer in their job description. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case in inclusive design. I think all of us, or anyone with relevant experience, can be the designer if they're given the agency, the opportunity, if they're listened to, and if they have a role in the decision making. And perhaps if you're building a train line, and these things can be complex to achieve. But actually, I don't think. I think there are practical ways of ensuring that people's voices are heard, and they are heard in the rooms that make decisions. I think surveys are kind of a relatively weak way of kind of gathering kind of insights. I think workshops and interviews are better than nothing, but I think there's nothing that can replace observation of the kind of the cross section of target audience or customer actually using things, doing things, and having a say in choosing which direction a design or a scenario might head in. And I think so what does, if there's the designer, perhaps in the traditional sense, the title is more of a facilitator. It's a process, it's a facilitation of gathering ideas and uncovering situations that then need problems to solve. And in what's the behavior and the spirit of that individual or individuals, it's one of patient observation, it's one of deep curiosity, and it is a role that is really willing to chuck everything out because it isn't right, and not be let their ego determine that the solution that they thought was best is the one that will continue. And I think those are the skills of an inclusive designer.
Yeah, and I think that brings us neatly into our next question as well, and thinking about being outcomes driven, and what is it we're trying to achieve at the end, and how do we use our experiences and lived experience to achieve that outcome. So the next question is around, to achieve meaningful progress, what needs to change in the way engineers, planners and decision makers think about accessibility? And Sarah, if I can come to you and then to Emma, please.
Sure. So I think that Emma's going to talk about innovation, but I sort of advocate that we strike a balance between innovation and actually getting the basics right. I think that there's lots of existing guidance and standards and research insight we have that we can use to stop creating problems in the first place that need to be resolved. So I'm absolutely not saying don't innovate, but we need to kind of get the hygiene factors in place, and we need to remove as many barriers as we can. So, for example, there's been a lot of work around we create, clear and sufficiently wide routeways, if we make spaces legible, easy to understand, if we use visual contrast right, if we put the right signage and wayfinding cues in place, tactile paving, all of those, none of those things are unique. They're not rocket science. So we need to get those things right, and we can then build on top and actually make sure that innovation is focusing on the right issues that need to be resolved, and not the really simple basics that we shouldn't have to do. I think there's also a couple of things that I sort of want to say about inclusive design sort of technical practice. The first is that don't build to minimum standards, or don't create to minimum standards. If you do that, those standards are already intrinsically designed to exclude people. They don't include the sort of full range of people that exist. So don't start there. Start much higher. Look at what good practices. Look beyond good practice as well, and start there. And then, even if you do have to compromise, you're at a much higher point to compromise from. There's lots more room for manoeuvre. So absolutely always aim for that. And I think also we need to be mindful that the way that people interact with spaces and systems changes over time. So just to give an example, in the last couple of years, 2 different government departments have commissioned research into, amongst other things, the space requirements for wheelchair users and mobility scooter users. And what they found is basically that our standards are out of date. Mobility scooters, wheelchairs, they're all becoming bigger. They're going to continue to become bigger. It'd be interesting to see how Tom's fits in with that, but they are going to become bigger. And at the moment, our standards meet the needs of far fewer people than when they were originally built in. So we need to kind of keep mindful of that. We need to future-proof what we do. We need to keep horizon scanning, and people with lived experience and inclusive design specialists can help with that. So it's really important to have that insight in there.
Absolutely. To build on what you've said, I think, how do we bring about meaningful change? We've touched upon this as a thread throughout all of what we've discussed this evening, but it's the meaningful engagement of disabled people. And I don't say that lightly. Tanya, you made reference to panels, people not being paid. There's a real difference between co-production and consultation. And I think, people probably need to have really honest conversations with yourself on the way home. And when you're engaging disabled people, are you looking for consultation? Is the product, is the innovation, is the solution, is it already decided? Has it already been approved and you're just looking for that approval from disabled people? Or is there space for genuine co-production? The two things are very different. We're currently doing some research at NCAT into co-production, and early June we'll have a toolkit outlining all of the steps, a real easy kind of grab hold of guide, a co-production toolkit that you can take and embed within your organisation. So do follow our work. I think that is the real key difference. We need to engage people, we need to have them in the room, but not just at the point where we're looking for approval or sign off. People need to be in the room at the beginning. And I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning, Tanny. How many disabled people are in your organisation? How many disabled people do you come across in your daily working lives? 1 in 4 people identify as disabled, according to the official statistics, and many more people that perhaps won't use that term, but would fall under the legal definition. We're here. If we're not in your organisations, that's a wider question about who you've got in the room and around the table, which is a real fundamental element that can change and bring about that meaningful change. At NCAT, you might be aware, we have our Scaling Innovation programme, and that is a real testament to the power of bringing together innovation, evidence and lived experience. The grant money is there, but it's not just a case of giving grants out. We look for meaningful engagement, and there's wraparound support to ensure that people are doing that in an appropriate, suitable way in order to have those really strong outcomes and impact, because it's proven time and time again, the innovations, the solutions, the initiatives that stick are the ones where disabled people are in the room shaping the decisions and shaping what that looks like. It's too late to bring disabled people in once decisions have been made and once those designs are set out. You need to engage people meaningfully really early on. So do look out for that toolkit and have that honest question with yourself. Am I consulting with disabled people? Am I looking for approval? Or are we doing genuine co-design and co-production?
Thank you. So I think we've heard some great practical things that we can all do to help improve accessible transport. So things like don't design to the minimum standard, getting the right people in the room, getting the basics right, and allocating funding in a way that allows you to get the best outcomes. So with those things in mind, so I'll ask one more question and then we'll come to some Q&A. So if I could ask each of you, if there's one thing that you would like people to take away in terms of an insight or an action from today, what would it be? And perhaps Tanya, I could start with you.
I think it's just don't ignore the problem. I think I've said in a couple of different ways, you would never design a rail system the way it is. But, we have that legacy and it is quite complicated. But, don't wait for someone else to try and change it or make it better. Think about what you can do, because, it's exhausting and it just keeps kicking the can down the road. And so, legislation can do some of it, government can do some of it. We probably need a whole debate on procurement process. I remember I sat on the board of TfL for 10 years and I remember saying, how hard is it to buy a train? And I went, apparently it's really hard. So I was very, basically I joined the board in 2008 and Peter Hendy just said, I don't care what you do, but just sit there for 4 years and say, what about the Olympics and Paralympics? And if you can do some accessibility, that's great. So I ended up doing a bit more than that. But it's just don't wait for someone else, because, we're kind of running out of time to make a difference to people's lives.
Shall I go along the panel? Sarah, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think my key thing to take away is about bringing the right people in. So, as I said before, no one is expecting you to become an inclusive design specialist overnight. You don't need to do that. You need to understand what it is. You need to understand why it's important, and you've heard that this evening. But you need to bring the right people in at the right time. You need to bring in people with lived experience, and you need to bring in those inclusive design technical specialists as well. That needs to be embedded in your process. It needs to be something that it can't be avoided. You know, we don't want to have systems where people can subvert the process and not actually have to do what's required of them. So it needs to be embedded. And I would say if the processes that you or your organisation are working with don't embed inclusive design from the start in that way, then the biggest thing you can do is either make the change if you have the power to do that, or push for change if you don't have that power. Do what you can to, you know, get a groundswell together and push for those changes to be made.
My takeaway message, I think, you know, to feed on the two responses we've heard so far, it's that each of us have a role to play here. Ignorance is no longer a suitable excuse. I think about the goldmine of evidence that we're sitting on at NCAT. If you haven't been on our website and engaged with the reports, we're an independent evidence centre. We're sitting on a wealth of evidence that outlines the barriers, but not just the barriers. There's over 178 tailored recommendations that you can access right now and take away into your organisations tomorrow. There are practical tools and things out there that you can embed and adopt and put into practice that would make a difference within your organisation in terms of culture, initiatives, policies, and of course, design standards. So if you're not engaging with evidence and data that is out there, we each have a responsibility to be doing that and taking heed of what the evidence is telling us.
Yeah, and ignorance is not an excuse. That's a really powerful line.
Yep.
And Tom, please.
So I would like everyone to reflect on what your story is. I spoke earlier about Ellie and her story and how that kind of really helps us as a team kind of stay focused. But you'll all have your own story, and then it's just to take a step, just to apply that experience of the person you're thinking of into your context and do something. Doesn't matter how big, how small, just do something, because that effort and that start will snowball, and it will kind of lead to other things. And I think just the intent to do something and be curious will be a brilliant outcome from tonight.
Just do.
Just do it, yeah.
Will. Thank you. So I think now we are going to go to some questions online or in the room, and I think we've got some helpers with some kind of microphones. We have a question at the front. Thank you.
Hello, panel. Thanks very much for some great contributions. I'm Julian Jackson from Vision Bridge. We champion assistive tech innovation, and we strongly advocate for technologies that we believe are going to make a measurable difference to people's quality of life. I would encourage people to go and visit Waymap, who are here. Some of you may know it. Sarah touched on wayfinding earlier. Lucy Bodkai from Waymap is here to take questions later on. I had a couple of observations and a question. I think we can all agree that regulations, or stronger regulations, and greater accountability, harsher penalties, and inclusive design or feedback are very important to encouraging people to get back on, we hope, a more integrated transport system. And we can also acknowledge that engineers are very, very good at designing rolling stock and platforms and lighting and layout and shelters and thinking about proximity between stations and all the rest of it. But surely this is also very much about processes. And Tammy, I know, has had a whole lot of experience about this. But we can design all these stations, but in terms of, for my experience, what I need is the ability to plan my route, to virtually tour a station or a journey, to manage a properly standardized ticketing and payment system, to experience support from properly trained staff, to have one of your speakers talked about mobility scooters, to have restrictions lifted on those. There are so many aspects to moving around the built environment which are so key to encouraging people to get back on these trains and so forth. So my question is, how do you think we can engage the engineering community much better? How can we encourage them to advocate and eulogise for better processes, to take responsibility for inputting into these processes and making our lives just a hell of a lot easier? Thank you. Sorry for the long question.
No, not at all. Thank you for the question. Would any panel member like to take that one?
I was just going to pick up on scooter users. So the madness of the system. Northern banned scooter users. Manchester and the B network, which there's some really good stuff happening there. Scooter users are banned on trams, and you have to get a permit. But how you have to go to the depot to get the permit. So how do you get to the depot if you can't go in a tram? I have a battery pack attachment. There are lots of different models available. I've never been refused access on a train. It's not a scooter, it's an attachment, and there's no legislation that covers it, so it's a bit of a grey area. DFT are currently looking at what they're going to do with that, and that could make a lot of wheelchair users' lives really much worse if they inadvertently ban attachments, because it's transformed my life. So there's all these things that the processes just don't join up. So until recently, scooter user could go on an Avanti train to Scotland and then not be allowed on a ScotRail train. But that took 3 years to get ScotRail to just say, we'll let scooter users on. So I think some of it's got to come from top down in terms of the process. I mean, just some of the processes within the TOCs don't match up. I'm not sure if the official, Emma, you might be able to tell me, the Network Rail map, there's a group of us call it the FAB map. I think we're probably being slightly sarcastic about it, but that's just the data's wrong, and then there's lots of different apps around. But then if the data's not accurate, then when the apps scrape the data, then that's all wrong as well, and then that gets perpetuated. So I think there's lots of really small things that could be done, and don't even start me on ticketing. I've got 4 different ticket apps, then I've got all the apps for each of the TOCs. And the price of tickets, because actually, when I'm travelling to and from work, taxpayers are paying for my travel. I try really hard to get the best price ticket. I bought one last week I was travelling on one TOC. That price on their app was 3 times as much on a completely different TOC website. And so, there's lots of promises of stuff like this that, that stuff could be sorted relatively quickly. And I'm a bit over, here we go, chief execs of train companies just having lots of pictures taken on the network. And, they'll dig out a disabled person every now and again to go, oh, we've got one, here we go. Oh, they're having a lovely time. And not actually think about, some of the stuff that we've talked about. But it doesn't end up being in job descriptions, KPIs. It's all a bit, at some point, we'll throw you some breadcrumbs and we're meant to be grateful. But I think actually the weight of the work that's going on at the moment, and NCAT and Clive Shearer, and we're doing some work together on Accessible Transport Commission. There's so much stuff now that's happening that is providing a weight of evidence that is going to be harder to ignore.
I'm not sure how we're doing on time. Have we got time for some more questions? Perfect. I think Simon's got his hand up. We're coming to you with a mic.
Thank you very much. Hello, good evening. Thank you very much. For those who don't know me, my name's Simon. I'm the CEO of Snowball. It's a disability app. It's like TripAdvisor for the disabled community. It's doing quite well at the moment. Thank you for your discussion tonight. Tony, I completely agree with your system. If you're disabled and you're asked to be on a panel, make sure you get paid. I've been asked to appear on hundreds of panels and I now turn them down because they refuse to pay me for my lived experience and as management of Snowball. Question is for Tom. Love the product. I do want to come and try it afterwards. Okay. The question is, and it comes around to policies as well. Now, I travel a lot recently, whether it's America, whether it's Europe, and so on and so forth. And in America, you can take mobility scooters onto public transport. In Europe, I travel in a wheelchair very similar to Tanya's. This one costs £8,000, so I don't take this one on a plane. My other wheelchair, which is Tanya's, is £6,000. When I get there, I hire a mobility scooter, but then I'm not allowed on public transport in France, in Spain, wherever I am. So the question is there a route for founders like yourself to design something that possibly could maybe not one size fits all, because we know that's probably not possible, but could identify as a wheelchair that might be similar to a mobility scooter?
I think that's a brilliant idea. We should start in about 10 minutes' time trying to solve that one. I think your general point is it's been complex. Yes, we've heard that the difficulty in being able to use a single solution across multiple different contexts, geographies or whatever. So. I don't know if this is helpful, but ours is designed to be 1,000 millimetres so that it can fit on a train. Most trains, right? That's the UK, and it's narrow enough to get through a door. And we are aligned with the legislation or the regulatory standards globally. But I think you and I should have a chat and work out how we solve that one together.
Happy to. Cheers.
Do we have any questions online?
There's one question online. Yes, we have one question online.
Should we go to
for me? Yes. Great discussion. I'd like to shout out stations with noise dampening, such as the Elizabeth line or Waterloo, that benefits not just those with noise sensitivity, but everyone. My question, has technology or design kept up with the real-life independent travel, such as speaking maps or wayfinders that pairs to people's smartphone?
I think, sorry.
No, you're definitely better placed than I. But if you go, and then I'll go after.
That would be good to hear your thoughts. But I think one of the experience that we've had at TfL is that there are lots of different solutions out there, and we've been involved in trialling quite a few different solutions, particularly thinking about wayfinding for visually impaired people. But there's no kind of one system that everyone's using, which makes it very difficult to be able to roll something out at scale. I think that's one of the issues that needs to be resolved, and maybe that's a sort of challenge to innovators out there to kind of work more closely together. I think another issue is that relying on sort of smartphone-based systems is problematic for a number of reasons. So there are lots of people who are still digitally excluded, particularly older and disabled people. We can't just assume that everybody has a smartphone. We need to continue to provide solutions that work for people that don't. And I think there's also a number of different issues around personal security. If you're travelling, you may not want to have your smartphone out all the time. Arguably, that there's sort of glasses that you can wear like the ones outside on the stand, but again that costs a lot of money, so there is the risk of excluding people. So I think there's lots more work that needs to be done in thinking about how we can use technology to enable people's journeys, but at the moment it's kind of not quite all joined up.
Yeah, I mean, coming up a slightly different way. I'm an optimist, and I'm very excited about the technology that's available to any one of us today to kind of create solutions to problems that we come across. I don't know whether Fred was showing me. Fred's our CTO, and he was showing me this tiny microprocessor that is probably as powerful as the laptop that I had on the desk. He was explaining. And we're sticking it into our scooters to be able to gather all the data and then be able to optimize that. And he loses me at this point. But I was like, how much is that kind of thing that you've shown me? £9. £9. Right. Okay. So we're looking for a kind of data scientist locally to where we are, so we can start doing more with our data. We got like 50 applicants, and my goodness, their CVs were unbelievably good. So we've selected one of them, and she's going to start in a few weeks' time. But we've got talent, we've got access to technology, and then we've got all these problems to solve, right? It's like, as a room full of engineers, this is genuinely an amazing time to be in the industry. So we've just got to channel that and be open to kind of solving things differently to how we did them before. It's just could be potentially amazing.
Yeah, embrace that opportunity.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question? I will let you pick.
Hi, I'm Hilary Lever, CEO at Engineering UK, and I was just interested in the panel's reflections on the pace of improving accessibility and actually whether it's picking up or whether there may be any impacts from, say, global corporations, which may, particularly with the US footprint, be struggling to keep this as high up their agendas, and what we might be able to do to improve the pace of change.
Emma, would you like to?
Yeah, I'll give a line on this. I can't comment globally. I can comment nationwide. And I won't comment too much on the pace of change. I'll leave that for the panellists. But I think what I am noticing, and I can only comment here on NCAT inboxes, there's a real appetite for people to access the evidence, and people want to know and they want to do better. People are actively reaching out and saying, oh, that's really interesting. I really want that recommendation. Oh, okay, we're currently working on a business case and we're embedding this, and we really want to use your report here because that's really meaningful. So I'm really seeing a shift in terms of people's appetite. Whether that translates into long-term change is another thing. Almost watch this space. But I think culturally, dare I say, those shifts, those kind of glimmers are happening nationwide. I think accessibility is on people's agenda. Whether that is in a meaningful way, whether that is through genuine co-production and in a way that will lead to long-term change, it, I guess, is yet to be realised. But certainly recognising that people are taking heed that accessibility is not going anywhere. We've got an ageing population. People are acquiring temporary illness, injury. And to say people are here, we're in society, so things need to change.
I mean, I think it can just be quite variable. It feels slower than it should be, but while, we still don't have, standards for accessible hotel rooms or accessible toilets or, the number of, when I was growing up, there were no accessible toilets anywhere. You had to be differently independent. But the number of accessible toilets I now go to where they've stuck the mirror up there somewhere, and just real basic things that are still being done sort of in a not very helpful way. But I think people want to do more, they're just not entirely sure how to do it. And I think certainly, coming out of the States, certainly some of the big employers in terms of equality, diversity, inclusion, employing disabled people, diversity. Some companies have really dialed back. A number of companies I know have just said, we'll just take some of the diversity off the website, but we'll still do it, but we just won't tell anyone we're doing it. Okay. I'm slightly uncomfortable with that. I was talking to somebody recently where they just, in their division, in their company, they've just put all white men on the website. I'm like, what? I mean, that's kind of fascinating. But I think some of the impact from the States will be, longer, to be felt. But then you look at the US, they're Americans with Disability Act. They're, you go to the States, nobody parks in a blue badge space without one in the States. The respect for that. Everywhere you go is wheelchair accessible. I don't think it's great for necessarily other impairments. A lot of that is because, the reality is they've had a lot of wars. They've got Paralysed Veterans of America is a massive lobbying group who's been able to kind of push for change. So that's where some of their changes come from. But it feels, we're at a really interesting time where we could just do a lot more. And that's why we've got to push for it as well, to kind of see, just don't let us, stagnate in where we are. And, things like, just very brief, changing places toilets, they're in super accessible toilets, they're, getting to be better. But sometimes I think it's still tied up a little bit too much in cost, rather than actually how you open society and make it, better for other people. So I would like it to be quicker than it currently is.
Thank you. So I think that brings us to the end of the panel session. Thank you for engaging with it. Apologies, we haven't been able to get to all of your questions. I think some, if not all of us, are around for a bit, so please do come and ask questions individually if you would like to. So I'll just go back to my glasses for closing remarks. So as we come to the end of the evening, I just want to take a moment to reflect on what we've heard, what we've learned, and most importantly, what comes next. So the title of the series is Engineering Needs Everyone. And tonight's reminded us why. Because everyone is included, everyone benefits, and together we can create a future where public transport isn't just accessible, but is truly welcoming, safe, and empowering for everyone. So please do take what you've heard tonight and carry it forward. So before we finish, I'd just like to offer my heartfelt thanks, first of all, to our keynote speakers and panel members. You've brought honesty, expertise, and passion, and I genuinely thank you for that and for your time for coming to the event today. I'd also like to thank our exhibitors and how they're taking innovation and bringing it into action. And all of you, both in the room and online, for giving your time, your attention and your commitment to making engineering more inclusive. So at this point, I'll say goodnight to those people who are online. Thank you for attending. And for those in the room, we've got a selection of drinks and bowl food available outside. Please do take the time to have a look around the exhibits if you do have the time. I'm sure the people there would be very happy to have your interaction and curiosity looking at the stands. So at that point, thank you everybody and have a wonderful evening.